You've been lied to about manifestation, not by accident, by teachers who needed to sell you something. Courses, crystals, journals, vision boards, moon rituals, and 100 other steps that Neville Goddard never once mentioned. The man who cracked the code to reality said you only need one thing. One, not 12, not a morning routine, not a specific frequency playing in your headphones while you sleep. Just one radical act of imagination that most people are too afraid to commit to. And that's exactly why they stay broke. One single thing. Every manifestation teacher on the internet has taken Neville's pure, distilled teaching and watered it down into a complicated system you can buy for 3 easy payments. But tonight, we're going back to the source. We're stripping away every layer of nonsense that's been added to his work. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why nothing has worked for you yet and exactly what to do instead. As Neville himself declared, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows. That single sentence contains more power than every manifestation course combined. Let me show you why. The manifestation industry is worth billions. Think about that for a second. An industry built on teaching people how to attract abundance has made its teachers incredibly wealthy, while most students remain exactly where they started. That's not a coincidence. That's the business model. If the techniques actually worked the way they're sold, you wouldn't need the next course. You wouldn't need the upgraded membership. You wouldn't need the crystal bundle or the manifestation planner. Neville Goddard taught for decades. He never sold a crystal. He never created a 12-step system. He stood on a stage and said the same thing over and over again because the truth doesn't need accessories. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption. That's it. That was his entire teaching compressed into a single instruction. But here's why the industry can't sell that. There's no product in it. You can't package pure assumption into a subscription box, so they added steps. They complicated it. They made you believe you were doing it wrong so you'd keep buying. And the tragedy is, every step they added actually moved you further from what Neville taught. But what exactly did he mean by assumption? That's where everything changes. Neville didn't use the word assumption casually. He meant something very specific and very radical. When he said assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, he wasn't talking about visualization. He wasn't talking about positive thinking. He was talking about a complete psychological shift in identity. Identity. Think about what it feels like to know your name. You don't hope you're called what you're called. You don't affirm it every morning. You don't visualize it on a vision board. You simply know it. That knowing, that absolute certainty that requires no evidence, that is what Neville meant by assumption. As he taught, an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Read that again. He said even if the assumption is false, even if your bank account says 0, even if reality screams the opposite, if you persist in the assumption that you are wealthy, that assumption will crystallize into your physical experience. If this is starting to shift something in you, hit like and subscribe to reprogram more of your money blocks. Because what comes next might be the belief that's been holding you hostage. Persist despite evidence. Most teachers skip this part because it's uncomfortable. They want to give you something to do. But Neville said the doing is the problem. And that brings us to the most dangerous mistake in all of manifestation. Here's where every modern manifestation teacher goes off the rails. They tell you to assume the feeling, and then they tell you to take inspired action. Sounds reasonable, right? But Neville never said that. He said the assumption is the action. The inner act is the only act that matters. When you add action as a requirement, you've just told your subconscious mind that the assumption alone isn't enough. You've introduced doubt disguised as productivity. And doubt is the one thing that kills every assumption before it can harden into fact. The bridge of incidents will appear naturally once the assumption is firmly held. Neville taught that you don't chase the how chases you. When you truly assume wealth as your identity, circumstances rearrange themselves. Opportunities appear not because you went looking for them, but because your consciousness shifted to a frequency where they already exist. Stop chasing, start assuming. Think about it like this. Have you ever decided something with such certainty that everything just fell into place? You didn't plan every step, you just knew, and the path unfolded. That's assumption working. That's what Neville was pointing at. But most people can't hold the assumption long enough, and there's a very specific reason why. Neville said something that most teachers conveniently ignore. He said you must persist in the assumption for a minimum of 3 days without wavering. Not 3 days of hoping, not 3 days of trying really hard to believe. 3 days of living, breathing, and sleeping in the state of your wish fulfilled as if it were already done. 3 days. Most people can't hold an assumption for 3 minutes. They close their eyes, imagine wealth, open their eyes, see their bank balance, and immediately collapse back into their old state. And then they blame the technique. But the technique isn't the problem. The problem is that nobody taught them how to persist against contradiction. As Neville powerfully stated, to reach a state, you must persist in imagining you are already there, despite the evidence of your senses. Despite, not until things get hard, not until your landlord calls, despite all of it. Your assumption must be forged in the fire of contradiction. Every time reality says no and you hold your assumption anyway, that assumption gets stronger. It gets denser. It gets closer to becoming physical fact. The contradiction is not your enemy. It is the forge that makes your assumption real. This is where the real work happens, not in journals, not in rituals, in the silent, invisible battle between what you see and what you assume. And this leads us to the technique Neville actually taught. If there's one technique Neville actually endorsed, it was what he called revision through the state akin to sleep. Not meditation apps, not guided visualizations on YouTube. A very specific practice done in the drowsy state right before you fall asleep. Drowsy state akin to sleep. Here's why this matters. In that hypnagogic state, your conscious mind relaxes its grip. Your critical faculty, the part of your brain that says this isn't real, quiets down. And in that silence, your subconscious mind becomes extraordinarily receptive. Neville instructed his students to construct a single short scene that implies the wish is already fulfilled. Not a movie, not a long fantasy, a single moment, if you want wealth. Maybe you're checking your bank account and seeing a large balance. Maybe a friend is congratulating you on your success. A single scene repeated until it feels as real as any memory you have. You loop that scene over and over until it takes on the tones of reality, until it stops feeling imagined and starts feeling remembered. As Neville explained, feeling is the secret, not thinking, not wishing, not hoping. Feeling is the creative power, the feeling of naturalness, the feeling of already having it. Not excitement, not desperation, but the calm, settled feeling of possession. That's the only technique. But there's something most people get catastrophically wrong about this process. This is the mistake that destroys more manifestations than any other. When Neville said feeling is the secret, most teachers interpret feeling as emotion. They tell you to get excited, to feel the rush of having money, to pump yourself up with enthusiasm. That's the exact opposite of what Neville taught. The feeling he referred to is not emotional excitement. It's the feeling of naturalness. Think about something you already own, your phone, your shoes. Do you feel emotional excitement about owning them? No, you feel a quiet, settled sense of possession. It's natural, it's assumed. It's not even questioned. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is not excitement. It is the absence of wanting. When you try to generate excitement about wealth, you're actually reinforcing the fact that you don't have it yet. Because excitement implies something new, something not yet possessed. But Neville wanted you to reach the state where wealth feels boring, where it feels obvious, where it feels as natural as the ground beneath your feet. Natural, settled, calm, possessed. Not the roller coaster of emotion, but the deep calm of knowing. This single distinction separates those who manifest from those who just daydream. But even this isn't the full picture, because there's a silent saboteur that most people never even detect. Neville had a phrase that makes most people deeply uncomfortable. He said you must kill the old man. Kill. He wasn't speaking literally, of course. He meant that the old version of you, the version that identifies as broke, as struggling, as someone who needs to manifest money, that version has to die completely. Not evolve, not improve, die. Because you cannot hold two identities simultaneously. You cannot be the person who is trying to become wealthy and the person who already is wealthy at the same time. As Neville taught with absolute clarity, you must abandon yourself to the new state and completely die to the old state. This is why affirmations fail for most people. They stand in front of a mirror saying, "I am wealthy," while every cell in their body identifies as someone who is not. The words bounce off the surface of a deeply held identity that has never been challenged. You cannot affirm your way out of an identity. you refuse to release. Old identity must die. Neville was radical about this. He said there's no gradual transition. You don't slowly become the new person. You decide in a single moment of absolute conviction that you are no longer who you were, and you never go back. Most people aren't willing to do that. They want to keep one foot in their old reality just in case. And that divided state is exactly what keeps them stuck. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that ties everything together. Neville spoke about something he called the Sabbath, not the religious day of rest, a psychological state of total completion. The Sabbath is the moment you stop trying and start being. When you've truly assumed the state of wealth, when you've felt it as real in your imagination, you enter a place of rest. You stop looking for signs. You stop checking for evidence. You stop wondering if it's working. Because someone who already has what they want doesn't look for proof that they have it. After you have assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you must do nothing. Only believe. This is the hardest part for modern minds. We're addicted to doing. We're addicted to progress. We're addicted to checking. And every time you check, every time you look for evidence that your manifestation is coming, you leave the state. You step out of the assumption and back into lack. Stop looking, start resting. The Sabbath is the ultimate test of faith. Not faith in a God, not faith in the universe, faith in your own imagination. Faith that what you created in consciousness must, by law, appear in your experience. From chasing to resting to receiving. That's the progression Neville outlined, and it's the one progression that no modern teacher will sell you because there's nothing to buy after rest. But the question remains, what about money specifically? Here's the part that hits hardest. Neville said your entire outer world is a mirror reflecting your inner assumptions. Your bank account is a reflection. Your salary is a reflection. Your debts are a reflection. Not a reflection of your actions. Not a reflection of your education. A reflection of your deeply held assumptions about money. If you assume, deep in your being, that money is hard to get, your world will reflect that. If you assume that wealth flows to you naturally, your world will reflect that instead. 1. Your finances reflect your identity, not your effort. 2. Changing actions without changing assumptions changes nothing. 3. The mirror can only show what you bring to it. This is why some people work 80 hours a week and stay broke, while others seem to attract wealth effortlessly. It's not luck. It's not privilege. It's the assumption they carry about who they are in relation to money. As Neville declared, change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you change within changes without. You don't fix the mirror by wiping the glass. You fix the mirror by changing who stands before it. And that brings us to the final truth, the one that separates those who talk about Neville from those who actually live his teaching. Every complicated manifestation system in existence is a diluted version of one instruction. Live from the end. Not work toward the end, not hope for the end. Live from it, right now, today, in every moment. When you wake up tomorrow morning, your first thought should not be, I need to manifest money. Your first thought should carry the feeling of someone who already has it. The wealthy do not wake up wanting wealth. They wake up being wealthy. No crystals required. No moon phases to track. No specific number to write 369 times. Throw it all away. Not because those things are evil, but because they distract you from the only thing that matters, your sustained assumption. Neville Goddard gave the world the most powerful teaching on manifestation ever spoken, and the world took it, wrapped it in 100 unnecessary layers, and sold it back to you in installments. The truth was always free. The truth was always simple. The truth was always you. As he said in his final years, man's chief delusion is his conviction that there are causes other than his own state of consciousness. There is nothing outside of you creating your reality, not the economy, not your boss, not your past. Only your assumptions, sustained and believed, crystallizing into fact. If you made it this far, comment assumption hardened to prove you're among the few who truly understand what Neville taught. Assume, persist, receive. Your mind is either programmed for wealth or poverty. Now you know how to reprogram it.